Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this fourth keynote of the last 2 days. Excuse me. The first thing I need to say is that we're very proud on the BAPT board to confirm sponsorship of this session by Empower and the Type Academy and the Myers-Briggs Company. And we greatly appreciate the support of both those organisations, Empower, Type Academy and the Myers-Briggs Company. You can access further information about all of them by clicking on the link to their website beside this session's information on our conference website, which of course is how you found your way here just now. So I'm really delighted to welcome Susan Nash. She's known to many of us. She was the former Director of Events for BAPT. She shared her knowledge and expertise on type through the Type Academy and through her many books. She's the owner of Empower, a consulting company, and she's an international speaker on psychological type and its applications, especially to self-understanding, communications, and leadership. She's going to talk about how to identify best fit type in a global society. So over to you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and welcome all. It's lovely to visit with you and looking forward to this session and also the in-person conference in June. So let me just start by saying, what do you see? And I mean the picture, not the writing. So drop in chat for me, please. What do you see? Okay, we see a duck and a rabbit. Thank you. So those of you who see the duck, just a quick show of hands, who sees the duck? Yeah, who sees the rabbit? And who sees both now? You see both, that's right. And the reason I wanted to start with this is that when we look through the lens of culture and type, we see two different things. And so being able to split them out and say, okay, metaphorically, which is the duck and which is the rabbit, is really important to help identify best fit type. So I'm interested, how many of you have worked with type in lots of different cultures or lots of different personality types who are different cultures in one country? Lovely. Can you drop in chat for me, please? What are some of the challenges you've experienced in that process? What are some of the challenges you've experienced in that process? My finger. Can't use a mouse like that. Extroversion is different, Shirley. Relevant examples of behaviors, people disregarding cultural preference is really important ones. Language has different meanings. Definitely language culture, getting the language correct if English is not a first language. National values, color, expressions of type, differentiating preference and expression of preference, cultural norms. Carmel, would you be comfortable expanding on what you mean by national values, color, expressions of type for us? You're on mute, just as I, sorry, I know it catches everyone. We have a coffee mug that says that, you know.
Yeah, sure. I find, well, for example, my parents were Irish, so I'm of Irish descent. And in Ireland, you might have the impression that everybody is of a feeling preference because it's so important in Ireland to be sociable and to caring and interested in other people. But amongst, you know, that you realize when you look a bit more closely that there are thinking types there and just as many thinking types as you might find anywhere else, but their behavior is colored by this national value of harmony in groups and so on and so forth. And you can see this in many different cultures.
Thank you. So the behavior, what you see externally is colored by the sort of the values and some of those assumptions of that type. And cultural norms can trump type. Yeah, one of the things we, as you know, we use a self-assessment process, and we always have to be aware of the cultural lens that might be influencing the self-assessment. So just a quick question, has everybody got the handout, the participant handout? Because I'm going to rely on this quite extensively because of we're covering quite a lot of content, and I want to do it in a practical way through case studies. And I'm not sure, can you give me a thumbs up if you do have it, Andy? Super duper. All right, people, thank you very much. If you haven't, I don't know how easy it is. It's on the website, Catherine, right, for people to find it. So do get it as a reference source, even if it's only on your screen. For this, I'm going to do a very high level look at two of Trump and R's cultural preferences. So we're going to look at that. And I'm going to look at that and at the impact those two cultural preferences might have on best fit type identification, and explore in case studies how we might use the knowledge of whole type to try and get greater clarity on best fit. So why a culture, and a lot of this has come up in the chat already, thank you. Most of you, many of you I think are familiar with my iceberg. Our perception is that interaction style, temperament, and type are inborn, and culture and nature, and culture is laid in from the birth onto about 7 years. So what happens is both of them tend to unconsciously influence behavior, because those patterns of behaviors, as you highlighted earlier, Carmel, have been laid before you're really self-aware as an individual. So if we're just looking at adapted style, their work, the experience, the education, the upbringing, we might miss and we might get the adapted style type rather than the best fit type. So I'm going to pause regularly. Any thoughts, questions on what I've just shared? Because I'm trying to make sure that we get to some of the real concrete practical applications. Any questions or comments? So do raise, as we're on two screens, do feel raise your computer hand if I'm not able to see you. I'm going backwards and forwards between screens, but okay. So what I'd like to do is sort of do a quick look at what is culture and what do we mean by whole type. And all of this is in your participant guide on page 3. So we tend to focus on the patterns associated, as you know, with temperament and interaction style, because if you're looking at a patterns framework, it's much easier to understand, oh, the whole fits and little individual pieces might not fit exactly. So that's type also obviously has the pattern of cognitive processes. It's just I find these two are very helpful in terms of needs and drive. So just a quick physical show of hands for me. And I think Catherine's already given me some insight on this. How many of you are familiar with and use temperament in some size, shape, or form? Okay. All right, we've got some good hands. For those of you who may be not familiar, I try to put in some cheat sheets when we get to that, and I'll highlight the cheat sheets in the handout for you. Let's look at the, Carmel, I presume your hand's raised still for temperament, correct? Okay, perfect. And now, similar thing, please. How many of you are familiar with the interaction style framework and use that on a regular basis? So fewer people, but still looks like the majority. All right, again, when we're doing an activity, I put in a couple of pages of cheat sheets in the handout for you, containing some of the information. So I tend to focus on these two lenses initially when trying to verify best fit type with the cultural lens. But then I often go back to the hierarchy of the cognitive processes. And I think most of you are familiar with the fact that I use a word to capture each, which I find organizations find easier to understand than things like extroverted sensing and introverted intuiting, because people then assume if you're introverted intuiting, you're an introvert, and extroverted sensing, you're an extrovert. So names seem to help. And just a quick show of hands again, how many of you are familiar with those Jungian function attitudes and the cognitive processes? Yeah, lots and lots. Okay, good. Then culture. Who'd like to volunteer to read this quote? It's on the slide and it's also on page 3 in your handout. Who'd like to just read that quote for me? Thank you, Jerry. Go for it.
Culture is beneath our notice in that no one bothers to verbalize it, yet it forms the roots of action. It is like an iceberg. The largest implicit part is beneath the surface. We notice it most when we collide with another culture. It shows the ways a group of people solves problems and resolves dilemmas.
Thank you, Jerry. Now, let me ask you, how many of you have lived and worked in another country? Just a quick show of hands. And so quite a few people. I'd love to see in the chat, please, what are some of the things that took you by surprise in living in that culture? If you want to say your core culture, the culture you moved to, and the things that surprised you. Whilst people are writing, who'd like to verbally share that too? Something that they bumped into that they absolutely were not aware of when they're living and working in that country. Your behaviors didn't get the expected results. Carmel, tell me a little bit more about that. Need to unmute again.
Sorry.
Still not. You're there.
Well, I've been living in France for over 40 years, so I guess, you know, it's a long time ago. It was a long time ago. But I remember at the beginning, I was often frustrated because I was behaving in a typically English way and I didn't get the results that I thought I would. I can't really think of an example, though, but I just remember the frustration, and it was an eye-opener to me. And I realized I needed to become a bit more direct and a bit more assertive. Like in being able to say I disagree, things, for example, things like that. Maybe having a more direct communication style.
More direct communicate. Okay, levels of intimacy, use of first names, formality, jokes, silences. Thank you, Sho. Yes, I remember one time a client coming up to me at the end of a workshop that Derek and I had run in America. He said, I am so offended that Derek just said that in front of the group to you. I'm like, he was kidding. We've been married. We've been married then for 35 years. I wouldn't still be married if he was serious. And the humor was just that what we find funny in this particular part of Texas, they found very offensive. Sight, sound, smells, dress, religion, football. Oh boy, does it frustrate me with America that there's no understanding of the culture of football, proper football globally, not American football. ESFP preferences don't thrive. Nicholas, gap year in Italy, I thought everyone was really kind of friendly, but they could still cheat me out of my change if they could. Yes, Teresa, that different, it's not such a rule-based society, it's a much more relationship-based society there. Yeah, so and I think the reason for that, and this isn't in your participant guide, and I've adapted this, I think, from something that Elizabeth Kendall shared years and years ago in a culture session that she did, which is we tend to look at the artifacts and products. So globally now, the artifacts and products get more and more similar. And moving to America, we made the mistake of thinking, well, they speak roughly the same language, so it's going to be a fairly easy move for us. Norms and values, completely different. Some of the social norms are so different. I mean, a silly one. When you have people working in your house in the UK, normally you give them a cup of tea, you know, builder's tea. In America, no person will have a eat or drink in your house when they're doing work on the house. And I think it's because it's much more of an individualized versus a community-based culture. So those norms and values can trip you up. And there are some basic assumptions, I think, that are very hard to surface. Valerie, let me come back to this. The word stupid was considered very rude indeed. I'd worked in English schools where that was routinely used. Love the difference. Hardest to explain why my home culture. Yes, how do you explain the differences in your culture? How do you flex because it's so ingrained into your personality? So we can see that it can color the behavior. And so finding best fit type is really difficult. So I like to do the first case study. And the first case study, it's going to be around a neutral versus emotional preferences. And that I gave you the cheat sheet on page 7. How many of you were able, yeah, words do have different meanings, Shirley, you're right. When will you do that? Could be challenging. Yeah, that also works with interactions between interaction style can be viewed challenging as well. How many were you able to read some of the high level overview on page 7 in your guide?
Susan,
Okay.
can I say I was confused by the other possible signals because the second two seemed counterintuitive, as though they should be the other way around, but I'm sure that's me being wrong.
Tell me what you mean, Teresa.
Well, other possible signals about understating. I mean, the left-hand side is about not being emotional, and yet the touching, gesturing, and strong facial expressions common. And on the right-hand side, it was taboo.
I think you're right. I apologize.
And the one after it just didn't quite seem right.
Thank you. Can you swap them over for me, please? So on page, other possible signals, the second and third ones, I apologize. It's very strange because I thought I'd done them all together. Thank you for finding that, Teresa. And so you've got the overview there of neutral and emotional preferences. So here's the situation. And this is on, the case study 1 is on page 4. And these are people that I've worked with, by the way. So Elizabeth is trying to sort between ENFP and INFP. Born in Brazil, but now lives in Germany. She works in learning and development for a multinational company and is sure that her best fit temperament is in the catalyst segment. So catalyst, idealist, for those of you who like to work with just the letters, it's NF. And she enjoys her role as she gets to see how her workshops help develop individuals' potential and help make a difference. She's struggling with selecting either extroverting or introverting, as her team members view her as gregarious and expressive, and she receives a lot of positive feedback about her engaging and inclusive facilitation skills. So what I also did for you, and these are the visuals from the book, Let's Split the Difference, I included just the overview, and this is how I work with type. I look at what's the temperament, what's the interaction style, and what's the hierarchy of cognitive processes. Hopefully I did have a mistake on those ages ago, and I've sorted those out. Teresa, if you find anything else, eagle eyes, let me know, please. So what you see as the main differences there between ENFP and INFP, because it's very easy to say it's just one letter difference, so does it matter? What differences do you see? And feel free to raise your hand and come off mute and answer. Yeah, Jerry, thank you.
The dominant function of whether it's coming from a valuing introverted feeling outwards, or whether you're kind of working from the brainstorming inwards.
Yeah, thank you. So where are you starting? Are you starting inwards with the value and going out, which is then INFP, or are you starting out with the brainstorming and then going in? And Renee, you said interaction style. Tell me a little bit more.
Get things going behind the scenes. So whether the person is going to be more a little bit in the background, observing and trying to bring everybody together over time as they observe how people interact, or whether they are more in the front, trying to encourage people and trying to gather people together and get them energized to do something.
Very nice. Yes. So, and for this one, looking at my cheat sheet, they both share the informing preference, which is on page 5. So that doesn't give you a lot of data. So get things going and behind the scenes both use informing. And so the difference then is initiating and responding. So what I'd like you to discuss in your groups, please, is how might Elizabeth's cultural background influence her selection of her best fit type? And this is on page 4 for you. How might you use the knowledge of interaction style to help her in her selection of best fit? And how might you use the knowledge of cognitive processes to help her in her knowledge and selection of best fit? Any questions on the activity? So that's a nice one, Sharon. Actually, that's a nice insight. Huge difference. ENFP, I know that I'm quite different from INFP. I often feel like their ability to read others can be superior to mine. Nice observation. So particularly look at how that neutral and emotional cultural lens might be playing out. So as this is, I'd like to try and get 2 of these done. So could we try and do this in 9 minutes, please? So Catherine, just groups of 4 or 5 for 9 minutes.
Okay, so I'm just creating the groups and you should see some invitations coming onto your screens, and please just accept the invitation that you get. These are mixed groups, so we're not splitting people according to type. And please join the group that you're invited to, and we'll see you back shortly. Right, so everybody seems to have joined. Now I've got a thing on my screen. Viv's back.
Viv's still here.
I haven't joined. I'm just jumping in between doing 2 things with a member that's trying to join. So please ignore me. I'll jump off again.
Okay.
Should we pause recording, Catherine, in this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Sorry. So welcome back. So give me, how was that activity? Thumbs up, tough, thumbs up. All right, who'd like to share your insights and how you might use whole type to verify best fit? Who'd like to share some ideas? We had 6 groups, so I'd love to hear sort of two groups report out their ideas.
I'm happy to share.
Thank you, Catherine. Good to see you, by the way. Long time no see.
Yeah, lovely to see you too, Susan. I actually happen to live in Germany, and I moved here from the southern US, which I would say for the US is a much more expressive, emotional part of the country. And when I first moved here, I thought, do I really have a preference for introversion? Because there's very little incidental contact, and it's seen as respecting other people's privacy and space. So if you go into a large room, you don't go and sit right next to someone. And in the US, that would be really quite rude. And as an introvert, it was often uncomfortable someone came right next to me. So she might appear interaction styles more initiating because of her cultural background, even if her preferences are INFP, because she's missing the just sort of natural, typical, from her point of view, social contact that she would get at home in Brazil.
Very nice. So yes, she might appear more initiating, and this is such a key word because she's missing some of the Germany is much more structured, much more neutral type culture, and so then when she's facilitating, that's maybe how she gets her core needs met there by engaging with others. Very nice, Catherine. Who else would like to report out some insights? And then I'll share some other additional ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I can only reinforce that, having also lived in Germany for nearly 30 years, coming from the UK. I think that, if we think about her in the workplace as opposed to in the home, I think in the workplace, probably in comparison, maybe in comparison to her own culture of Brazil, she may be one end of the EI spectrum, meaning extroversion, introversion in this instance. With regard to Germans, even if she is introvert, which I think chances are she might be here, she will be perceived as much more extrovert than they are, and it's always relative to self and own culture. That for that reason they see her as much more gregarious, which may not be something that sits with her, but actually in relation to the culture she's in, she could appear to be much more gregarious than she actually is. So I think one of the suggestions from our group was, what's she doing in her spare time when it's really her preference, rather than her trying to fit in with the people around her, who are going to have naturally a lot more respect for age, culture, position, power, organizational structure, and even are using, the form of the verb, which is a much more formal, distancing form of the verb. So, ENFP is often very much very close, creating those very close sort of relationships very quickly. German society much more standoffish, keep distance and so on. So I think it might be that at work this is not the best lens to use in the home place. Looking at what she's doing in her spare time when it's her pure personal choice was a suggestion from our group, which I think could actually help to understand better the best fit question.
Really nice. Look at what's happening in her home life, and the culture and the culture of Germany. People are viewing best fit through their lens. So let me share a few ideas that I had. So I thought that we could use interaction style through the lens of drive, decision-making style, and what sort of result, because they're very different for behind the scenes and get things going. And then through the cognitive processes lens, as Jerry mentioned earlier, how can we filter between that leading with valuing versus leading with brainstorming, and the parent being much more, a supportive parent being, is it brainstorming or is it valuing? So let me share a few things. So, and this is in your handout as well. So what I would look at is, I would look at what sort of result is this person? If you asked her, how important is it to get everybody bought in, so an embraced result, that tends to align more with get things going. If you compare it with behind the scenes, I would want to ask, how important is, talk to me about the quality of the product and the time it would take to produce that quality product, to filter through a little bit of the behind the scenes, because behind the scenes often what is looking, the result is the best result possible. The second thing is, I do see a big difference between consultative decision making in this area and collaborative decision making. So consultative decision making, it starts with the individual. Okay, what do I want to achieve? It looks sort of extroverted for a while because it goes out and consults with those that you need to consult with. And then it goes inside to make the decision. So it's a much more individualized decision, which can actually quite confuse people if they've been consulted, because it's an individualized decision. And once it's made, it's sort of immovable. I mean, I hope that's not an offensive word. Having 4 behind the scenes in my life, I see a lot of, when that's all digested and I've integrated all my ideas, that's it. We're closed, there's no movement here. Whereas with get things going, that collaborative decision making, it much more flexible. The group wants to go this way, the group wants to go this way, the group wants to go this way. So really asking questions about, how do you make decisions? Give me an example of some of the decisions you've made. What was the main criteria? That can really help narrow it down. So that's how I would use interaction style. Any thoughts or questions or observations on that, particularly because we've got quite a few behind the scenes here? I mean, she did end up with lots of reflection, choosing INFP as the best fit. So any thoughts or observations you'd like to share?
Susan, does this relate to the process outcome dimension of interaction styles?
Yes, it does. Thank you. In interaction styles, Linda's wonderful book has process and outcome. I don't particularly like the name because of directing and informing has a process focus, a group process focused. But yes, for in charge and behind the scenes, the main focus is the outcome. Yes, in charge, attainable, quality. Whereas get things going is much more involved. Where are we in the process? And if you want a clearer definition of that in the time, Linda Berens's red book, Interaction Styles 2.0 is fantastic. I'm not sure in your book, Catherine, if you did much on, Catherine Stothard, if you did much on process and outcome, if you want to.
There is a page on it, yes.
Good, so how to get on with anyone has also got a page on that, yeah. Oh, good, I'm glad you agree, because I'm always very careful about consultative decisions because it's pressing need to integrate really fits. Thank you. And the pressing is going in. I have to go in and integrate, whereas urgent is I have to go out and interact. So this should give you some really good tips, I think, and questions to ask and observations to make. And then obviously initiating, responding, I like the phrase direction of energy in the external world. As Jerry explained earlier, are you going out first to brainstorm and then in next to reflect? Or are you going in first for your valuing and out to engage and brainstorm? So, and you have to, the two things I work on are, do they tend to talk things through or think things through? That seems to be the one thing that seems to be culturally separate for some reason, because certainly with those more expressive cultures, you can't go by the body language and tone of voice because, have you ever met anyone from Italy who doesn't use their hands? If you ever met someone from Finland who uses their hands all the time, there's some stereotypes or generalizations there. So that stream of consciousness versus stepping into think. And the reason I start with interaction styles is potentially we can use every cognitive process. It depends on how much we've been educated. I mean, we'll use each cognitive process with a degree of fluency based on our upbringing, experience, education. It's just that it seems to me that so cognitive processes are harder to verify. I find interaction style, some of those lenses really, those preferences really help. Any other questions or comments before we do a second case study? Okay. All right, so our second case study, we're looking at individualism and communitarianism. And this has much more of a temperament flavor to it. And this is another one I see a lot, actually. John is trying to decide best fit between ISFP and ISFJ. Born in China and moved to the US with his family when he was 10. He works in Silicon Valley as a software engineer and identifies with ISFP improviser as he loves the variety of his work and the freedom that software design provides in his role. He also identifies with ISFJ stabilizer as his family all lives within 20 miles and he believes in spending quality time with them through social events. So, same 3 questions. Here's your overview again. I'm going to risk doing a second breakout, actually, because I think there's a lot of benefit to working in groups for this. So the drawings, these visuals are on page 8. And we've got an overview of temperament on pages 9 and 10, and then the individualism versus communitarianism on page 11. So again, how might his cultural influence his selection of best fit type? How might you use the knowledge of temperament here? And how might you use the knowledge of cognitive processes to help him in his best fit? So again, we're going to do 9 minutes for the exercise. Any questions?
Yes, Susan, could we see the case study on the slide again? Because I don't have access to mine at the moment.
Yeah, now
if I could just take a quick photo of it.
Yeah, I think I can share it to the breakout room, but I'm not sure on this version of Zoom if you can. No, it's not, it wasn't one of the little boxes.
Can I just ask a question? Is Susan sharing her slides at the moment? She is, isn't she? Yes?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, fine. Okay.
But this is the I moved on from the case study, so there it is.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, 9 minutes.
Okay, I'll open the rooms now then.
I've just posted.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Jerry.
So if anyone wants to copy that, I guess.
And it's in chat.
Okay, right. I'm opening the rooms now then. I'll stop recording.
Welcome back. Again, how are those discussions in your groups? Got to get some nodding, got some smiling. In the interest of time, I'll go through what I would do. If you want to drop additional thoughts and ideas into chat, please do, and I'll track the chat and read them out. So I'll talk through what I would do. If you want to, in the meantime, drop thoughts into chat. So as I say, we've got the individualism versus communitarianism, which is such a mouthful, preference. So what I would do here is I would look at temperament first because of the core needs. So the key difference obviously was one had a preference for an improviser, one had a preference for a stabilizer. So how might you use the knowledge of temperament then in verifying best fit? What sort of things might you ask or look for? And I'd love some ideas. If anyone's happy raising their hand. How might you use the knowledge of temperament? Sources of energy, inflow versus outflow, true to self, true to others. Tell me what you mean by that, Shirley.
We were just discussing about different ways in which we could look at these. We could clearly see this tension here between the improviser stabilizer almost. That one is he comes from this culture. It's a very community-based culture. And on one side, and we were talking about potentially this is where he's spending energy. It's important to him. He has a duty towards his culture. But then we've got his choices at a very different workplace in which he's got freedom, he's got autonomy, almost slightly rebellion. In order he does his own thing. That's the choice that he's made. And it's, a very different improvising culture in which maybe that's where he's gaining energy and spending energy. So we thought maybe thinking about it in terms of energy in, energy out, so energy flows. And the other was, what's duty, tradition, and so on important to him, but equally what's his own preference. So if he's being true to himself, does he actually, being true to himself, want the autonomy, the freedom to do it his own way and have that, sort of unlimited, unbridled, or is his true to self, fitting with traditions, structures, the way in which things have been done for generations, and trying to look at those two to understand this tension between improviser and stabilizer.
So that's exactly right. That what he was experiencing was, and actually the reason he came to Silicon Valley and liked the work, particularly in Silicon Valley, and didn't want to go back to his roots because his parents actually moved back, was because he loved the freedom and the autonomy. And so when we really pushed, and Sharon, I love your point in chat too, he loves freedom when he's on his own. When he's with his family, he morphs back to his origin, which was a lovely phrase. And thank you, Heidi and Tony, Toby, I think in the groups that really helped. It really helps having real people in those cultures. And I would also look at the talent is another one, and the time orientation is another big one, here and now or in the past. To what extent you hear, last time we did this, let's keep it sequential, Here's the process, which would be more ISFJ. And to what extent are you see the flexibility in the moment. This is what's happening in the moment. This is how I'm responding to it. This is what I want to do now. So that's the big one. And I know we're almost out of time. And I put this in your materials. The affiliative versus pragmatic preference is also really helpful in temperament. Doing what needs to be done at the time it needs to be done is pragmatism, versus let's think about people and how they relate to it. And you can have a feeling preference and still be pragmatic. So that's another lens that I would look at. And I included the affiliative pragmatic information at the last page of your handout. And Catherine, I had a suggestion to look at the third function as a relief function, TI versus NI. Very nice, Mark. Those functions would be very helpful. And thank you. Great case study of how our behavior is influenced by a lot of factors in addition to our personality. So final tips, be aware of those cultural influences because they're not obvious on the surface. You have to really dig to find them. Recognize the influence that your culture is having on your perceptions. To what extent is there projection going on there? Temperament and interaction style, unconscious patterns of needs and psychophysiological energy, and go deeper with the cognitive processes. So thank you. I know it's been a rush through. I knew this would be a huge topic to cover in a very short period of time, but as a typical in charge, I'm always willing to give it a whirl. So I'll be around for a few more minutes, and I'm going off to see our granddaughters play volleyball. So if there's questions or comments, feel free to stay. And it was lovely to work with you again. Do remember Catherine's book on temperament as well, my book on Let's Split the Difference, and do think of coming to the in-person session if you possibly can, because they're always really wonderful, rewarding programs.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. And Susan, at the in-person, we're working with coaching and culture, I think, and there's lots of other stuff going on there as well. Thank you ever so much, Susan. I will stop the recording in just a moment. I just want to record on the recording our thanks to Susan for a really fascinating session.